Here is 7 different ideas or elements that I think really makes up a data-driven culture. And some companies have all 7. Some companies have a few of them. And of course, once you know what's working, what's not, it's much easier to then determine where to spend your time. So the 7 elements of a data-driven culture, in my opinion, are being able to collect and store the right data, aligning data with strategy and outcomes, democratizing access to data. We have heard many speakers talk about this idea. Dealing with some of the psychological issues of data, overwhelm, lack of trust, breaking through silos, providing the right training, and then managing expectations around data. So let me look at each one in turn, give you some examples and some ways on how to best think about how to level this specific item within your organization. So first, be able to collect the right data. We have heard many speakers talk about data warehouses, architecture. This entire track is really around architecture. And this is really the first point where we start and determine what is the right data, are we collecting it? So in your case, this might be structured data, semi-structured, unstructured, but we know to understand the different elements in the way your business operates. For some businesses, this is really quite simple. You have maybe a digital product and a very limited ecosystem in which you operate. Other businesses, complex multinationals, have a lot of different data points. But being able to collect it, centralize it, and quickly access it are all really under the world of data architecture. And as a company, you want to make sure and understand what the different gaps or some of the blind spots might be in your current data ecosystem. When you think about data architectures, whether they are as advanced as Airbnb or as small or as simple, perhaps as a smaller company, they typically have 5 major elements. There's a collection. This is where you might have ETLs that are collecting data from websites, from web apps, from systems, from offline sources. You have storage. This is where we talk about data warehouses, data lakes. There's some kind of cleaning that needs to happen. You might be transforming the data, organizing it. This is, of course, getting easier and easier. Then you want to visualize it, and you might have things like Tableau, Power BI, and a few other tools, and you want to monitor it to make sure that things are working as expected. So thinking about how you rate on the data collection and be able to use that data is really the first element of a data-driven. This is really the prerequisite before we can get to a few other things. Second is aligning strategy. I think it's sometimes easy to sort of get caught up in the technical details of the technology. And remember, at the end of the day, data is just really meant to help a business grow. And if you're having issues tying it to some kind of tangible outcome, it's going to be really hard to be able to develop an analytics plan or strategy. So it's not so much about what you can do with technology, but how it can actually help the business either reduce costs, increase growth, find new customers, release new products. And this is really a shift from a purely technical approach to an approach that's focused much more on what's the technology do for us that it doesn't. Many of my clients, they're typically on the non-technical side of the business, whether they're executives or in the management team. And one of the biggest challenges is they don't fully understand the technical, and they're not quite sure why they're investing so much money into it. So being able to explain that is a major value for anyone on the technical side. And being able to align it is even more important. Number 3 is democratizing access to the data. We hear a lot about this word. It basically just means how easy it is for someone to actually use the data. Do they need to know SQL or some other technical language? Or do you have dashboards that are easy to create? They might not be as fast as SQL or perhaps as elaborate or sophisticated, but they have a way of doing it. And typically what you need here is multiple ways of accessing data. You want to be able to support those people who have advanced skills. They can query the database directly. You want to be able to support those people who may know Tableau or Power BI or something else. And then, of course, even have options for people to download the data into something like an Excel or CSV if you're working with limited quantities. But you want to make it easy, nonetheless. You want to reduce the friction, not have gatekeepers, and make it clear. I think one of the best things companies can do for data is make it so they trip on it. So it's available in dashboards and Slack and email, and it's just available everywhere. So it's easy to look at it. It's easy to interact with it. Next, we have human issues. And the human issues are really tricky because technology doesn't always solve them, right? You might have heard of things, for example, like data overwhelm. Now you have teams that have too much data, and you have a management team or executives or leaders who actually don't know how to actually process the data. What do you do with it? What's important, what's not, right? We saw that a lot in COVID-19 where there was all this data, but wasn't quite sure exactly what to do. You kind of knew what was going on at a high level of detail, especially a few months into the pandemic, but it wasn't quite clear what you should do next. And that's really all the realm of psychology and how do you deal with this. So in your companies, you want to think about how you actually going through these challenges. Are people being overwhelmed by the sheer volume of data that's being given to them, that's available to them when they create a dashboard? Do they trust the data? I'm constantly surprised when I run into companies and they just don't trust the numbers. They look at them and there's something weird about them, there's something kind of funky, but do they trust the numbers? And if they don't trust it, they're likely not going to use it, regardless of how advanced your data infrastructure might be. So all these challenges are really more on the people side. So they require more of a people approach, whether it's coaching, training, sometimes just merely explanations. Technology might be able to help a little bit, but our ability to process data is pretty static. Our ability to collect data from a technology perspective is rapidly increasing, exponentially increasing. But as humans, there's only so much data we can actually process at any given time. So how you design those dashboards, how data gets rolled out, what kind of support is given to people to access the data, it's all part of this one item. Next, we have silos. If you're driven around in the countryside, then you may have seen, there's big metal cylinders. And these are usually holding, some kind of farm product, grain or something. And companies, of course, you have the similar idea. You have the silos. You might have finance data that doesn't interact with marketing data, or sales data that doesn't interact with operations data. In some companies, this is by design. Companies in the finance space, cryptocurrency, they might have a high level of regulation, and they want to protect the data from being too widely available. Nonetheless, being able to break through the silos, connect the data to different ways is another element of being data driven. And silos, like the previous point we talked about, it's really not so much about technology. It is really relatively straightforward to throw all the data into a data warehouse and then combine it and then make it talk to each other. It's really a question of politics, a question of how you make sure that data will be protected, that you're not going to have a concern that the legal compliance team is going to be okay making this data available to other teams. So how do you work through those? Who's responsible for working through all those different challenges and working with the different teams and making sure that their concerns are heard of? So how will you deal with silos to get rid of them at the beginning, and of course prevent them from being able to be created again? It's another element of how you think about data-driven culture. Next, we have training. So data is fantastic, but I keep seeing an assumption that everyone knows how to work with it. All you have to do is just give them the tools or the facts, and then people will be able to work with data. And I actually don't think that's the case. I am amazed at how many people I run into that don't actually even like math. They don't feel comfortable with math. It kind of makes them think of college, and it wasn't a favorite class. But the math we're talking about here at the analytics level within the marketing team or sales team and so on, this is not complex math. This is not the realm of data science and advanced models. This is really basic statistics, basic math, basic probabilities. And all those different skills can be taught. You can do them in workshops or training, one-on-one. You can choose the right approach. But this kind of training needs to be done so people become comfortable with the numbers, reading the numbers, and understanding what to do with the numbers. And this is really sort of the end goal of many data-driven companies, not this assumption that everyone needs an advanced degree to work with numbers, but that you can teach some of those basic ideas and basic ways of working with data. And lastly here, let me talk about expectations. So within your company, you want to make sure what expectations are being set around data. That is it expected that everyone's going to use it to back up opinions, to back up projects, new initiatives? Is it expected that you're supposed to see it in meeting updates, in reports, in reviews? It's expected that you can get an answer out of the data within a few minutes, not days or weeks or months. So whatever expectations you have, they may be unspoken. They would then shape how your company and culture thinks about data. So think about those expectations. Look back at how your team thinks about it, how other teams think about data, and what is the best way to either level up those expectations, to meet them, or just improve them overall. And this, of course, may be completely different. You may have all the right pieces, the technology, the skills, but the expectations may not be there. So you can start to think about what is the missing gap from the sort of the 7 items that we talked about here when it comes time to build a data-driven culture.